For today's lesson, we're going to learn how to convert fractions into decimals. And why do we need to know how to do this anyways? One of the reasons why is that when we're comparing fractions and decimals, sometimes it's harder for us to visually see the difference in the value. And so having them in the same form really helps us to clearly see which number is greater or less than the other one. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Let's get started. So if you've been following along in your workbook, we are in Chapter 4, Fractions Meet Decimals. If you'd like a copy of your own workbook, you can visit theblazehaven.com. So our focus for today is to convert fractions into decimals by using division and reasoning. And we do this so that then we can compare and order any type of rational number in a real-world context. So our question that we want to be answering is, how can we use what we know about division to help us to understand and explain the relationship between fractions and decimals? So we're going to start with a fraction. We're going to use division, and then we'll end in decimal form. That's what is the progression as we move from fraction to decimal. So let's look at the example 2/5. Okay, 2 is our numerator, 5 is the denominator. 2/5, the way you say it is also how you're going to write it out when you're dividing 2 divided by 5. And when we work that out, we know that 2/5 equals the decimal 4/10. Okay, so remember that the numerator is what's being divided. That's the dividend, the number on the top. And then the denominator is what you're dividing by, the divisor. And in division, order matters. If I had 2/5 and I do 5 divided by 2, I'm going to get a completely different answer than I would get with 2 divided by 5. So we want to remember that all fractions are division problems, and that's how we find our decimal form. Now we are going to be comparing fractions and decimals, and we're going to determine which value is greater than, less than, or equal to. Okay, and we're starting with number 1 here, 6/10 versus 3/5. So since we are practicing converting fractions back into decimals, that's what we're going to do for all of these problems. Since I'm comparing a decimal to a fraction, it's easier to either compare a fraction to a fraction or a decimal to a decimal. So we're going to convert 3/5 as a decimal. 3 divided by 5, 5 goes into 3 0 times. I add in my decimal point, 5 goes into 36 times. 6 times 5 is 30. It goes in evenly. So 3/5 is the same as the decimal 6/10, and so the values are equal to. Let's go ahead and have you try number 2. Go ahead and click the pause button, and we'll come back and go over the answer. So 5/8 versus 7/10, I'm going to convert 5/8 back as a decimal. So 8 goes into 5 0 times, but 8 goes into 50 6 times. 6 times 8 is 48. I'll have 2 left over. I should have made a little more space here. 8 goes into 2. I'm going to drop in. 8 goes into 20. Let's see, 2 times. 2 times 8 is 16. 4 left over. I drop in my next 0, and 8 goes into 45 times. So 5/8 is the same as the decimal 0.625, 625 thousandths compared to 7/10. Okay, so 7/10 is greater than 625 thousandths, so the 7/10 is greater. So when I write my inequality, it's going to be, we're going to say the whole number sentence here. 5/8 is less than 7/10. We are going to continue this idea by comparing fractions and decimals. Now there's just more than one. Okay, so we're going to keep the idea where we're going to convert these fractions into decimals and then compare them. We're going to put them in order from the smallest number to the biggest number, least to greatest. So let's start here with number 1. We have 2 1/3, 1 3/10, and 1/3. And some of these you might be able to identify right away. Okay, but we're practicing converting fractions into decimals. So 1/3 I'm going to do real quick right here. 1 divided by 3. 3 goes into 1 0 times, but it goes into 10 3 times. And we remember, hopefully you'll have this memorized soon, this is a repeating decimal. So 0.3 repeating, we have 1 and 3/10. So I already know that 1 and 3/10 is greater. And here 2 and a third, we know a third is 0.3 repeating, and we also know that 2 is greater than 1. So our answer is going to basically be writing this in reverse. Our smallest value is a third, 0.3 repeating, then 1 and 3/10, and then 2 and a third. Okay, so you can rewrite it as fractions or decimals. Whoops, let me rewrite it. I'll rewrite it this time as the original format. So 1/3, then we'd have 1 and 3/10 and 2 and a third. Great. Let's go ahead and pause and try number 2. 5.5, 1.5, and 5/10. Let's check our answer here. Again, I'm going to convert this fraction into a decimal, and this problem's a little easier because I already have 5 and 5/10 and 5/10 in decimal form. So 1.5, I'm just going to convert a half to a decimal. 2 goes into 1 0 times, and it goes into 10 5 times easily. This is a half is one of our benchmark fractions, so you should soon start to memorize that 1/2 is always the decimal 5/10. And so here we see we have a repeat 5/10, 5/10, and then 5.5, or 5 and 5/10 would be the order. We can also write it with, oh, I forgot the 1. That's why it's the same thing. It would be 1 and 5/10, or 1.5. So when we put them in order from least to greatest, 5/10, 1.5, and then 5 and 5/10 would be my greatest value. So there's my answer. Today we learned how to convert fractions into decimals, and really what you should have seen is the reason why it works is because all fractions are division problems, where simply they're just written in different forms. So when we take a fraction and rewrite it as a decimal, the reason why we want to do this is that if I have lots of fractions and decimals mixed up with different values, it's harder to determine which one's my greater or smaller value. And so if we put them all in the same form, all as fractions or all as decimals, then we can simply see which one is the greatest value, which one has the least value.